Hey guys, it's Chaplain Corey Reeder, and welcome to the first ever digital date night. I'm so glad that you have joined us. I hope that you have your pizza in hand and your bride by your side and the kids in another room, hopefully watching a movie or doing something that they're distracted, because we're going to camp out. We're going to be here for a little while, and it's going to be so cool, so fun. I'm honored that you have joined us, even digitally, and so thank you so much. It's a weird time, but hey, we're gonna make the most of it. We're gonna make lemonade out of these lemons, right? So hey, we're talking tonight about communication, which is so fantastic. It's something that Jillian, my bride, we've had to learn a lot. We've had to learn sometimes the hard way, but it's amazing though. This August, let's see, we will have been happily married for like 9 years, which is not bad out of 12 years of marriage. I think it's really not bad. So, communication, right? It's the, yes, you got it. It was a joke. Thank you. I see that one or two chuckles out there. Communication is the lifeblood of our relationships. I mean, think about the analogy of blood that carries the oxygen throughout the body, including to the main vital organs. It is the lifeblood of our relationship. And frankly, guys kind of intuitively understand this. I mean, we're almost perfect communicators, and the fact that we're so efficient that we can use so few words and communicate so effectively, right? So guys, if you're already a perfect communicator, just go ahead and slip that hand, raise that hand up in the air. I want to see the hands of all the guys who are already perfect communicators, nice and high. And then ladies, I want you to just affirm his perfect communication with some good nonverbal communication right now. Just let him know how great he is at it. There you go. That's perfect. All right, good. So if you happen to not be perfect, I got a couple of things I think you can learn. I think they're going to be helpful. It's all about communication tonight, which fuels connection. This is the hand and arm signal for connection. We're going to use it over and over again, right? So I'm excited about it. This class is going to be, I promise you this, the best class on communication you have ever received, if you will listen and participate. If you're going to listen and participate when the time comes to do that, right? But I'm promising you the best class of communication. Okay, so we're going to have two kind of blocks of instruction, as it were, on communication. One is going to be the world of communication, and then the next one is going to be 10 landmines of communication. And the first block is a little less than 12 minutes. The second block is about 17 minutes or so. So there's a decent chunk of time, and there's also going to be a time in the middle of those or after those where we want you to pause and discuss, even after this intro, where we want you to pause and discuss some statement, some question that we talked about, right? And so you can kind of take as much or as little time. If you get to have great conversations after the first one, you're talking for like an hour, and the kids' movie's done, and you need to come back to this the next night, that's okay. But come on back. This is free chicken to learn from. But that's what we're going to do. It's going to be in that kind of discussion. But let me set the context, if you will, because I mentioned connection earlier, and all of this communication stuff happens in the context of a relationship. And all humans were created with the need for healthy emotional attachments, healthy relationships, secure, happy, healthy, responsive, available, engaged relationships, right? And the first one is with our parents, our caregivers, right? Your first lesson in communication is when you look up at your mom, your dad, and you smile, and they smile, right? That joy, that delight, mutual delight is the first human communication in your little life, and you recognize her voice because you heard her voice in their tummy, and you get the deal, right? But humans are created with that need, but it's not just the parent-child relationship, it's also romantic relationships, right? And this is kind of based on some work by a lady named Sue Johnson. She came up with, began emotionally focused therapy a little more than 30 years ago, and she's building on some work of a guy named Dr. John Bowlby, who's the one who really started all this attachment theory stuff back in the 40s. Don't worry, we're not going to nerd out on that stuff. I'm just kind of giving you the background. So some of you who are nerds are like, oh, let me get that. What's that all about, right? But we long for secure connection and attachment in marriage. But sometimes, in fact, a lot of time, we experience this disconnection. Life does it to us. We do this to each other. We hurt each other, disconnection. I get deployed, disconnection. regular old life and fatigue, disconnection, right? The fancy pants word is attachment wounds, but we're going to call it disconnection. It's just those moments of disconnection. And when we feel this, we don't like it. We don't like it one little bit, right? And so what happens is we protest. It's like if you're working on your car and the wrench slips and you cut your hand, you're going to go, and you're going to cuss and throw your tool and do something and cover it up. You don't like that pain that it caused, and so you protest that pain. Now, the way we protest disconnection typically is on some spectrum of pursuing or withdrawing. Pursuers say, hey, I feel this disconnection and I don't like it, so I'm gonna talk to you about it. I'm gonna get your attention. I'm gonna pick and I'm gonna nag. I'm gonna draw you out, but you will talk to me because we will get reconnected. I don't like this and we will be reconnected. Withdrawers, on the other hand, say, ooh, I don't like this. This disconnection kind of feels like conflict. Maybe if I just leave it alone for a little while, it'll die down and cool down and we'll be all good, right? But then the pursuer's like, hey, you're leaving me, right? And then the other, you go and change clothes and stand in the closet. You follow the closet. Oh, okay, I'm gonna go down to the kitchen and get some, okay, right? And you have that fight that moves around the house. It's two different ways of protesting the same problem, which is the emotional disconnection. And hear me on this, all right? Hey, come back. If you're like eyes are glazing over, come back, lean in. All communication takes place in the context of this dance. Disconnection, reconnection, pursuing, withdrawing. All communication takes place in the context of that. Sometimes it is to reinforce an already secure attachment. Oh, babe, I think I forgot to pay the bills. Don't worry, sweetie, I took care of it this morning. Wow, how could I live without you? Right? You're reinforcing a secure attachment. Sometimes you're a pursuer and you're saying, hey, we're disconnected and I'm trying to draw you out. Right? And so you're protesting disconnection by communicating, trying to draw them out, right? That might be fighting, it might be nagging, it might be begging, it might be asking questions, who knows, right? And even the withdrawers, you're saying, hey, I'm hurt by this disconnection, and so I just want to go cool down and lick my wounds for a little while. And so even if I'm, stonewalling, or even if I'm distant, I don't like that, right? But it's all taking place in the context of this dance right here. So all the things we're about to say in communication, don't forget this context. Now this may be a new idea for you, or if you went to my last Strong Bonds, you've heard this before, and it could deserve totally its own class, right? But for now, I just want you to hit pause. If this is a brand new idea, discuss it, discuss what you think, and if you already are kind of clued in on who's who, I want you to talk about whether you think you are a pursuer or a withdrawer. Incidentally, it oftentimes falls on gender lines, right? Typically, like 80% of males are withdrawers, 20% are pursuers, and 80% of females are pursuers, and 20% are withdrawers. But there's always the exceptions, right? And so, what does that look like in your relationship? Take a few minutes first and discuss this, and then we'll come back into the next segment where we're going to get into the world of communication. All right, see you back in just a second. All right, guys, welcome back. I hope you had a great opening discussion. Maybe some of that world of the pursuer and withdrawer stuff was kind of completely new, and the attachment science, it can kind of get a little nerdy there for a second. If that's completely new to you, hang on, that's okay. It can be deep waters, but I think it's also really important. So we're going to come back to that. I probably could have camped out the whole time on that. But I think that the communication piece is really important for us to focus in on. So that's where we're going to go next. So I hope you've enjoyed that first discussion and maybe got an extra slice of pizza or whatever you need to do. But now we're going to talk about the world of communication, some of the factors that go into it, and a couple of the kind of the ground rules and principles to start, right? And so the first thing that we need to know, there's three crucial starting points, okay? Three crucial starting points. Number one is mostly communication is caught, not taught. Right? Caught, not taught. And of course, here I am teaching, right, on communication. But we grew up in the school of our families, and we learned communication. We're going to talk about that more in a second as we get into family of origin, but most of our communication has been caught, not taught. Secondly, it's mostly on autopilot. We don't stop often and think, I wonder why, I responded with anger when she gave me that tone, or I wonder why I always choose to pose my opinion in the form of a question. Would you like to do this? Oh, okay. Well, I'm guessing you would like to because you asked a question, right? But we're on autopilot, right? So it's caught, not taught. Number 2, we're on autopilot. And number 3, when it comes to communication and the style, different is not wrong, right? If your spouse, your wife, your husband is different than you in communication, that's not necessarily wrong, right? Complete the sentence with me. Different is not wrong. It's just obnoxious. Yes, it is obnoxious. I know, right? Because now we have to learn them and learn ourselves, and it's obnoxious. But we're going to get through those things. So remember those 3 starting points, and then let's get into some of the world of communication. Some of this stuff is not new to you, I hope not, but it's all important, right? So here's types of communication, right? Number 1, we have verbal communication, and obviously that's obvious. Bing, we're using words right now. Verbal communication. Experts have told us that the actual words that we say are a very small piece of the pie. But it's not that they're unimportant. They're just a small part of what actually goes into communication. We'll talk about those other things, nonverbal in the context, stuff like that. But, if you're looking at a whole house, the words that we use might be like the shingles and the vinyl siding, which is most of what you can see, right? But, man, there's a whole lot more to a house than the shingles and the vinyl siding, or at least I hope so. You don't have much of a house otherwise, right? But they're important, right? It reminds me, there's a lieutenant colonel I was working with at some training camp I was being a chaplain for, and he told a story earlier in his career. He had a British exchange officer who was working with this unit, and this guy came in and saw his platoon sergeant sitting there one day, a big dude from Kentucky, and he's sitting there one day, and his feet are up on his desk, and his head's in his hands, and he's just kind of staring, furrowed brow. And the Brit guy comes in and says, "What's the matter, platoon sergeant? You look rather pensive." And the big old country boy from Kentucky doesn't really move much, just kind of like nods his head. No, I'm just thinking. Right? So words matter, right? And you can miscommunicate just with words. But that's the verbal piece. Then there's the nonverbal piece, right? And we know all the things that can go into that, right? A whole lot of things can go into nonverbal. You can communicate with your body language. You can communicate with your tone of voice. With your tone of voice. I used to say that I could say my dog's name 5 different ways and mean 5 different things, right? I could be calling him Otis, Otis. Or I could scold him, Otis, Your tone tells the story, right? Eye contact, that tells something. If you can or can't make eye contact when you're communicating. How about this? Timing. This is a nonverbal communication. But if you're doing something else, and then you're supposed to respond and you wait, and then, are you preoccupied, or are you communicating with that timing? Or when you say something first thing right away in the morning, it's like, hey, your timing communicate. And something else something else that, yeah, that's true. Something else that communicates is the way you use your phone when you are, see, I got you, didn't I? You were like, is he serious? Is he really serious right now? Is the way you use your phone when you are or are not communicating, especially if you're talking with somebody else in person. I know I'm old school. I didn't grow up in the world of smartphones. I think I didn't get my first one until after college. But if you're having a face-to-face interaction, finish what you're doing, put it down, and then be back to face-to-face, or say, excuse me, right? But if you're distracted and swiping and doing your thing, no, I'm listening, keep talking, right? Yeah, right, come on. And so the nonverbal things, right? There's other things like nonverbal things like actions that you do, right? This is really interesting. Even things like spending money can be a communication. Well, he spends all his money on stupid guns and trucks, so I'm going to get my hair done and nails done once a week. Okay, pursuing hobbies, whether you do or don't, that can be a communication to your spouse. Something nice like giving a back rub. Just walking by, give a back rub, little like, hey, I love you, thinking about you. A nonverbal communication there. Doing or not doing chores. right? It could be like, hey, I'm gonna do all these dishes, do all this other stuff because what I want is later on time for us to connect. So I'm showing you this by communicating. Or even bad things in communication, things that get physical, things that get kind of dangerous. These are all nonverbal forms of communication. Next we have verbal, nonverbal. Now we have number 3, context. And there's a ton that can go into this context piece, right? But the biggest one is perhaps your family of origin. Your family of origin. That's kind of a fancy pants therapist way of saying who you grew up with, right? But how do you express love in your family? How did you express joking and humor in your family? What about anger or conflict or forgiveness? Was that ever given or offered or expressed in your family of origin? Was your family of origin direct or indirect in communication? Did they come out and say what they meant all the time, be very direct with it? Or was it kind of like, read the clues and read the tea leaves and do that, Another way of saying that could be high context or low context. Am I supposed to guess what you're thinking because you look grumpy and you're sitting by yourself? Or are you going to just come out and say, hey, I was really disappointed that we chose to do this when no one really listened to me and I wanted to do that instead. Like, oh, okay, I'm sorry, let's talk about that. High context or low context. Also, what is taboo? Ooh, we do or don't talk about that in your family, right? Because if 2 families have 2 different versions of taboos and then they get married, well, guess what? That's going to create a problem, isn't it? Or at least it's going to create some challenges in communication. What is taboo? Even down to like what counts as a cuss word, or what cuss words are normal to say. I've heard young children say things around my kids that I'm like, whoa, where did you hear that? But like, maybe it didn't count as a cuss word in their house, or maybe, I don't know, maybe their parents just don't care what their kids say. But all those things come from family of origin, things that are or are not off limits. Another context thing is gender norms. I used to actually get upset with Jillian, that's my bride, about the way, I wouldn't get upset with her vocally or visibly, but it just kind of made me feel sad that she could communicate with some of her girlfriends in ways that she couldn't or didn't communicate with me, particularly like just really sharing her heart. They understand her feelings on things, and I think we've even gotten better on that as the years have gone by. But man, like they just connect and understand each other in a certain way. So gender norms might be a part of communication. Personality issues. Are you a people person or a task person? Are you a thinker or a feeler? Are you more conflict avoidant? Or are you like a recreational fighter? Like, yes, let's have it out. Let's have this conflict, There's all kinds of different personality norms and things. Are you a details person or more of just a big picture? Like, I don't care about the details, just whatever. Like, even the speed at which you communicate can be a factor in your personality. And so personality does affect those. If you haven't taken, I've got a bunch of copies down here of The Road Back to You. That's an intro to the Enneagram. That's kind of my favorite little personality thing I've been nerding out on. But I've also used the DISC profile, just kind of the big 4 main personality type tests. Other personality tests I've used. I love that junk. I can nerd out on it. If you're interested, call me up. We'll nerd out on personality sometime. But it all affects communication. Other things are even things like your motivation or your motives. Are you listening to win a fight, or are you listening to hear and understand? And then things like your openness to hearing new ideas or information. Maybe you're kind of closed off, and so like, I don't want to hear. You have a better way to do that? I don't care. I don't want to listen. All those things can affect the context that your communication takes place in, right? But to reiterate our starting points. All that stuff, most of our communication stuff has been caught, not taught. It's been caught, not taught, right? And then most of the time, all of our life, it works just on autopilot. We're just cruising along, right? And different is not necessarily wrong. It's just obnoxious. It's different, right? And so here's what I want you to take a few minutes and chat about. I'm going to pause the video, take a few minutes to chat about some of your family patterns in communication. How do you see some of your family's communication patterns show up in yourself? Or which one of those patterns might be good to keep and which ones might be good to change. So talk about some of your family communication patterns. Maybe if that's not as easy, you can talk about personality conflicts and personality issues and how that affects your communication. Or maybe if both of those are too hairy and too challenging, I'd really like you to focus on those. But you could, if that just seems hard to get at, maybe just think about somebody that you communicate very easily with and very naturally with. Who is that person, and why do you find it so easy to communicate with him or her? So pause the video right now, stop and take a minute to discuss these family of origin and personality issues, the world of communication, and we'll be right back. Hey guys, welcome back. I hope that last discussion session was really helpful. It can be maybe dicey or maybe challenging or perhaps super illuminating to start talking about the ways that your family of origin and the communication patterns can affect your present marriage. It's really crazy how you see, oh my goodness, I'm turning into my dad, or whatever the case may be. But that can be really enlightening. It can also be challenging. And so if some of that was challenging, or if that really started a conflict, a fresh one, or dug up some old wounds, and you need to have these conversations in the context of maybe alongside of a close friend or a counselor, I totally understand that. And maybe the next section will be even hard to listen to. So hit pause and come back to this one when you're ready. But don't stop though, because it's good stuff. So up next, we've got the top 10 landmines for communication. And I was thinking about the right image to use. Is it pitfalls? Is it potholes that you drive into or whatever? And I kind of went with landmines. One, because I think some of these things can be explosive, right? And two, some of them are kind of hidden. You don't see them coming, then you step on it, right? But also, sometimes we actually lay the landmines in there because we're trying to cause an explosion. And so I wanted to allow for some intention in our own communication styles and our patterns, because sometimes, guys, we just blow it, and that's me too at the top of the list, right? So here's the top 10, maybe not in any particular order, but here's a top 10 of some. Some you're going to identify with very quickly. Some you're going to be like, yes, please. Pound the table, say amen. Are you listening to this? And then others, we just need to hear. So we'll run through the top 10, and then you guys get to pause and discuss it. So the first one, number 1, is hot button words. If you know that your husband, your wife, has some trigger words, those can be dangerous in your hand. So don't use it, right? Things like the word I had a friend who knew this about his wife, and the word feelings would erupt conflict. And he would say, well, I'm glad that you feel that way, but the facts are, and it's kind of played the logic versus feelings thing, whereas clearly the logic is superior and feelings are not. And so if he mentioned that word, it was bing, 0 to 60, right? Other words could be past pain points or trauma, or even saying PTSD. I know that with your PTSD or whatever. Or things like, well, if you want to be a good mom, if you want to be a good dad, and then you're like, whoa, ding, ding, ding. Maybe you didn't have a relationship with parents, whatever. Hot button words, them, don't use them. Number 2 is the guessing game. The guessing game. That is never really saying what you mean, but kind of meandering around it. I'm just going to hint at and go around and around the target, but I'm going to leave it up to you to get to the bullseye. I want you to know what I'm trying to say without me actually saying it. Playing the guessing game, right? And for couples that have known each other and loved each other and lived together for a long, long time, there's no more guessing game because they know one another. But for most of us mortals, we need clarity in communication, and it helps. Number 3, I called this one lazy communication. There may be a better title for it, but here's what I mean, right? It's when you prefer an easy alternative to communication, or an alternative communication outlet, right? So it's I can talk about this stuff with the guys, but I just don't want to talk about it with my wife. Or, she's got all her girlfriends that she goes really deep with, but never shares anything really with me, or some version of that, right? Maybe you have a close friend who knows you, especially in marriage, if it's, if there's a potential or a previous romantic partner that you have a close, easy communication with, like, well, danger, Will Robinson, danger, right? Those are easy. It's like junk food, but in your marriage, you have to do the hard work of communicating, learning, listening, right? And so don't do the lazy communication piece. Number 4, I've called clueless communication, right? Here's the thing, is we take a test before we can get a driver license. But we don't take any tests before we get a marriage license. You just go up there and you have a witness sign it, and courthouse, ding ding, there it is, right? I actually sometimes wonder what the marriage license is even for, right? But it's like, we don't have a test for that. Do you know how to communicate? Do you know how to speak your mind? Do you know how to resolve conflict? Okay, you can get married, right? I don't know what the test would look like, but it's like handing knives to kids. The other day I saw my daughter opening an orange with a knife, and I was like, oh, help, oh, hold on, because I haven't really taught her how to use a knife, except for, carefully cutting cucumbers on the counter. But she's not going to cut an orange in her hand with a sharp knife pointed towards her hand. But that's what our words can be like. If you have no self-awareness, right? Not understanding the stuff we just talked about personality and about family of origin and how that stuff influences the way you communicate. If you have no self-awareness about your tone and your body language and just how you're projected, right? If you have resting mad face and you don't know it, then, hey, you might be working on clueless communication. Secondly, you might have no others awareness, right? So there's the no self-awareness, and then there's no others awareness. It reminds me of a video. Don't pause this and look it up, but at some point you can, right? There's some video, I think it was a little commercial or something. There's a sea captain who gets on the radio and he's, Mayday, Mayday, we are sinking. And this other guy wanders into a radio room and he hears it, and he puts on this headset and cautiously goes, he's a blonde-haired guy and, pretty tall and broad. And he's, Mayday, Mayday, we are sinking. And then the other guy is listening and he goes, what are you thinking about? Right? Like, he had no idea of what this joker was talking about. And, the kind of the German accent thing, whatever. It's funny, right? But no awareness of the other and how this guy's communicating, right? But we do that all the time. We do that all the time in our own marriage, right? Clueless communication. Number 5, and this is a little harder to hear, right? But it's criticism. Criticism is when complaints get personal, right? Not, hey, when you didn't pick up the milk on the way home from work like I asked you to, I just felt like you don't care about me. That's one way of saying it. Or you could say, you just never do what I ask because you don't care at all. Like, you just don't care about me and the family. Whoa, like, now that's criticism. Like, that's when the argument has gone to ad hominem, right? It's against the person. And so criticism, it can often be fault finding, or just never praising your spouse, your husband, wife, for what he or she does. In the Army, we often give briefings, and there's little readiness briefings, right? And we'll have these slides, and we'll put up, here's these different companies or platoons or sections, and they've got to get their shots, and they've got to do this or that, right? Or they, whatever, readiness metrics. And you'll have a whole slide, and we even color code them, right? Red, amber, and green. And what that does is it immediately lets you zero in on this one tiny little red block at the bottom of a slide when the whole thing is green mostly, right? But it's like, hey, what's that, immunization numbers and Charlie Company thing? What's that all about, right? I'm just picking on Charlie Company, right? But fault finding, right? Criticism, just don't do it. Number 6 is stonewalling. This can actually oftentimes be a response to that criticism and fault finding, right? This is when communication just shuts down. Just shuts down, right? Maybe we're having a fight, maybe having an argument, and then, like, you know what? Like, it stops here. And sometimes that can happen when people become what they call flooded, like emotionally, even just biologically flooded. Just everything's racing, your heart's racing, and you're just like, I can't talk about it right now. And sometimes that can be okay, But there's a difference between, hey, sweetie, I'm clearly getting upset and flooded right now. I think I need a timeout. Do you think we could maybe talk about this in about an hour when I've had time to clear my head? I'm going to try to go for a walk, lift some weights, do something. That's different than just shut down, right? Stonewalling is number 6. Number 7 is what I call sword fighting, right? And that's everything you do is either attacking or defending, right? Like the guys who are fencing or something, you're either attacking or defending. You're not ever really listening, but it's like, well, you always this. No, I wasn't that because blah, 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 blah. Like you're never gonna, it's like every conversation or argument is about gaining or losing ground, and you're not gonna give up an inch because everything is just a sword fight, right? That's a pitfall that we fall into all the time in our communication. Number 8 is assumptions. My autopilot equals her autopilot. So of course, we're going to just be able to fill in the blank, right? So I fill in the blank for her tone, for her motive, for all the emotional stuff that's underneath. And when none of that is clear, I just kind of fill in the blank. Making assumptions about what somebody else means can be really dangerous, right? It can be a landmine. Number 9, hearing but not listening. Hearing, not listening. Ladies, can I get an amen? Glory, right? But this is not doing the work to dig into the layers or the context, like we talked about in the last segment, not doing the work to dig into the layers of communication. So, for example, you might have words. Here's the words that are said, right? But underneath the words might be feelings. A lot of them, maybe primary feelings and secondary feelings, emotions, right? And then there's also kind of your mood, like what kind of day are you having? Has a lot of stuff going on? Are you just tired? Whatever. There might be some mood issues underneath it. And then there's maybe some motives. I'm trying to draw you out when I say this and I feel this and I've had this kind of day. I'm trying to draw you out, right? Or underneath that is maybe even a desired action or desired outcome. I want connection. I want you to see this. I want you to acknowledge this. I need you to fix something. But you might have just said something kind of vague and whatever. But hearing and not listening means I hear this, I acknowledge or don't acknowledge or whatever, but I'm not doing the work to dig deeper, to understand. That is the hard work of communication. And frankly, guys, I don't know if I really learned that until I had to start teaching this stuff and until I had to start doing counseling. Until I began to get paid to be a really good listener and to be a conflict resolver and to help other couples learn to listen and learn to communicate and learn to resolve conflicts. It's not something that is natural. We're not like born with it. And it requires a ton of humility to listen deeply and not to just hear. All right, enough said. That was kind of preachy, right? Now, speaking of preachy, number 10, the 10th pitfall is unforgiveness. Unforgiveness. See, the fact of the matter is that we're all going to blow it sometimes. We're all going to screw up. We're going to hurt one another. We're going to take a tone. We're going to misuse something. We're going to offer criticism when it wasn't welcome or wasn't ready. We're going to hurt one another. But then what are we going to do about it? Right? And I think that it has to be forgiveness. Forgiveness means, and I kind of made this up, I didn't look this up, but choosing to relinquish your right to keep your spouse in your debt, right? I kind of like bury the hatchet and don't leave the handle sticking out. There's an old country song about that, right? I'm always telling Jillian, there's an old country song that says, and there usually is, right? But to relinquish your right for any kind of revenge or judgment or whatever. I'm acquitting you of wrongs. That doesn't mean that you didn't hurt. That doesn't mean that you don't feel bad. That doesn't mean that whatever happened wasn't wrong, and that doesn't mean you don't need to address patterns going forward or respond appropriately, right? Especially if it's a significant hurt. But there has to be forgiveness in communication. I'm reminded of, for us, I mean, chaplain alert, right? I'm going to tell a Jesus story. For us, our faith is both the engine that drives our marriage and the rails that keeps us from falling off a cliff, right? Or down the mountain. our faith is at the heart of it. Matthew 18 tells a story, and Jesus is telling a parable about forgiveness. And he has these two servants that are servants of the king, and one goes to the king and asks for forgiveness. He owes him like $1 bajillion. Like if you do the math and put it into today's money, it's like bajillion. And the king says, okay, I forgive you, right? Wicked servant number 1 runs over to servant number 2 and says, bro, you owe me a few $1,000. Not an insignificant amount. It's not like $5 that you could just, whatever. Like he owed him a significant amount. And this guy's like, no, really, I'll pay you. And he goes like, rah, 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 and has servant number 2 thrown in debtor's prison until he can repay him. And then guess what? The king gets word of it. And he's like, oh, heck no, right? He probably didn't do that. He didn't do the snap. But he said, you wicked servant, I forgave you $1 bajillion. And you can't forgive your fellow servant a few grand? Now that few grand is not insignificant, right? Like that's my car costs a few grand, right? That will pay for a lot of stuff. But man, next to the bajillions of dollars, right? So when Jillian and I have real conflict, or when we step on one of these landmines, for us, forgiveness is rooted and grounded in our faith. It's rooted and grounded, and I know that because of what Christ has done for me, he has forgiven me of way more wrongs than I will ever commit against her, and more than she will ever commit against me. So I can offer that forgiveness freely because I've been forgiven so freely. So unforgiveness is a landmine, and we've got to have a solution for that. Okay, speaking of preachy, right? Let me review them really quickly. Number 1 was hot button issues. Number 2, the guessing game. Number 3, lazy communication. 4, clueless communication. Number 5, criticism. Number 6, stonewalling. Number 7, sword fighting. Number 8, that was the attacking or defending, right? Number 8 is assumptions, making assumptions. Number 9, hearing but not listening. And number 10 was unforgiveness. These are the landmines that you and I are so prone to step in, and I want you to take a few minutes at the end of this. We're going to have one more short wrap-up video after this, but I want you to take a few minutes and discuss which of these landmines do we tend to step on? Which ones do we hit over and over again? And please, some of this stuff is heavy, so be gentle and remember to listen. Listen for understanding, and let's see if you can help discover some of the communication landmines that you're stepping on. All right, see you back in just a minute. All right, guys, you made it to the last segment here. Thank you so much. We're going to wrap it up quickly. We've talked about the world of communication, the verbal, nonverbal, the context clues. We've talked about the landmines in communication, top 10 of them. And I hope you had some light bulbs going off. I think I saw some lights turning on out there. I hope that was light bulbs going off and not your house burning down on fire because you started a fight. No, I'm teasing. But it's been cool. I hope that those things have been instructive and enlightening to you. We also, remember, talked about this all in the context of pursuing and withdrawing, of this dance of connection, right? And what I want to remind you of as we leave is that we were created for this connection. We were created for healthy relationships, healthy relationship with God, healthy relationship with one another, right? The Bible, for crying out loud, begins and ends with a marriage. It's one of my favorite points to make when I do a wedding, right? And so intimacy is possible, and there is hope, right? So I hope that as you guys have relooked at some communication things this evening, that you have gained some insight, that you've gained some hope, that you've solved a couple problems. I love you guys. I'm so delighted to be your chaplain. God bless you, and don't be afraid to reach out if you want to chat about any of these things further. Thanks, guys. Take care. God bless.